It's really fun. It's like a freaking... I was gonna say Grateful Dead concert!
Except the mosh pit is the animals trying to fight to survive.
Oh my gosh.
Those poor animals.
Tune into a cleaner future with Pollution Evolution.
We are your hosts,
Faith
and Kimberly.
To follow along on this journey, you can stream Pollution Evolution every Saturday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. We're streaming on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts from.
Welcome to this week's episode, episode 12, Follow the Yellow Lead Road.
We are so excited that we are actually 12 episodes in, guys. Thank you for following us along on this journey, and we really hope that you've been learning a lot about these pollutants and these issues we're hitting on. Today's topic is really interesting, and it's some kind of a pivot from what we usually discuss, because we typically discuss things that affect us down here in the Southwest and maybe some global reaches, but we're actually going to be going to a different region of the U.S. today.
Mm-hmm. So this week we will be discussing acid mine drainage. And as you all know, we will be discussing what it is, where it comes from, the economic impacts, the environmental and human health impacts. And Faith is also going to cover some of the chemistry related to it.
Mm-hmm.
So before we begin, Faith, do you have a story about acid mine drainage? I know you mentioned Pennsylvania earlier.
Yeah, so as you guys know, I went to school in Pennsylvania and I lived there for a few years. And coming from Texas, we have some mining activity out here, especially out in the desert, but for the most part, it is nothing like it is up in Appalachia. And I begin to hear about acid mine drainage because people would say, oh, like, we don't swim in those rivers, like, you can't go fishing in those streams. They have, like, acid mine drainage, the water pollution's degraded. And, of course, I asked questions about it, and I begin to realize how far-reaching it was. So I found out that over 5,500 miles of streams in Pennsylvania have been affected by abandoned anthracite mines, which is a type of coal. And these mines being abandoned pose a significant risk to environmental health for both the environment and humans.
Mm-hmm. So, I want to talk about why it's important for us to learn about acid mine drainage, and this is directly from an article, and it will be in our Linktree resources, and they stated, if acid mine drainage is not managed properly, it can cause considerable environmental degradation, water and soil contamination, severe health impacts on nearby communities, biodiversity loss, and aquatic ecosystem loss. So, acid mine drainage can impact so many things.
Yeah, it literally sounds like... I mean, because if it's going through a stream, the stream's interacting with everything in its path.
Yeah, so acid mine drainage forms at mining sites. So, that's where the name acid mine drainage comes from. Specifically, coal and gold mining areas. The main source of acid mine drainage is through the oxidation of sulfide mineral ores. So, for reference... sulfide mineral ores are a class of minerals mainly composed of sulfide or sulfur components or disulfide as a major anion or component. This problem is largely prevalent in Pennsylvania, as Faith discussed, and throughout Appalachia due to the abandoned coal mines. So let's talk a little bit about how, whenever it's abandoned, and like what acid mine drainage can actually do.
Yeah, so essentially... when we have these abandoned mines that are sitting here, they have all of these compounds in them that are just laying abandoned, and as rain comes down, we begin to have reactions. So the very first reaction that we're going to see is pyrite, which is a sulfur-containing compound reacting with dissolved oxygen and water to form ferrous iron and sulfuric acid. This reaction makes the aquatic environment where the water runs off too acidic to support life. So as these mines get rain, the water runs through them and it begins to run off into our streams. Mm-hmm. And then a secondary reaction that happens after that is iron 2, oxygen, and hydronium react to form iron 3 and water. So the oxidation of our ferrous iron or iron 2 yields the product ferric iron or iron 3, which is insoluble in water. So if it's insoluble, that means it doesn't readily dissolve in water. Ferric iron coats the bottom of the stream bed and further degrades the environment. So at this point, the acid mine drainage has already entered into the stream bed, and it's coating the bottom of them, and like basically like this bed of insoluble metal, essentially. And then our third reaction, our tertiary, we could call it, is our ferric iron and water react to form iron hydroxide and another hydronium. And hydronium is just a hydrogen with an additional proton on it. So it would be H plus or H3O, depending on how you learned it in chemistry. And this final reaction creates a precipitate in the form of iron hydroxide. And a precipitate forms when a solute, in this case water, or not, sorry, water's the solution. The solute is going to be our iron, my bad. When the solute separates from a solution, in this case water, to form a solid. At this phase, the human eye can clearly see this, and affected streams actually have an orange-red tint to them, such as Shamokin Creek in Pennsylvania. And like I said, this is readily observed in Pennsylvania. If you go out in nature and you are near an abandoned mine that has not either been reclaimed or treated, you are going to see the water orange-red, and that is because we are seeing this tertiary reaction precipitate out this iron hydroxide. And all of this starts because of mining activities and not properly managing them. And like mining as a whole, it's a huge industry. I mean, we've been using mine as an electrical source for centuries, and we still use it. It's still integrated into our like energy story here in America. But the lasting impacts of it, not only on the land but on the people, like, because when these mines are abandoned, think about the people that worked in them. What do they do? And then they live in these towns being affected by this water, and it's just like a vicious cycle, keeping them stuck in poverty, environmental degradation, and then only saying like, well, this is your only option.
And we're going to talk about a story related to that here in a moment.
So, the Susquehanna River Basin, SRBC, has documented 489 untreated acid mine drainage discharge in the Susquehanna River alone. The SRBC also says that each year, untreated discharges send 73.6 million pounds of acid and 31.5 million pounds of sediment contaminated with iron and aluminum downstream to the Chesapeake Bay. And if you guys are outside of the US, the Chesapeake Bay is one of the largest bays in America. And it is a hotspot for biodiversity, ecology, has tons of keystone species, and literally serves and provides so much food, so much commerce. Like, I cannot, like, stress the
importance of it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the environmental impacts that are going to come along with acid mine drainage. So acid mine drainage, it poses issues for both present and future generations because it can result in low pH, high concentrations of potentially dissolved metals. As she was saying, that precipitate that's forming is a metal. We have metalloids and sulfates. So among these dissolved metals is iron, the most common pollutant in acid mine drainage. So iron reacts with oxygen in the air to produce iron oxide precipitates, aka they call it yellow boy, as it turns the streams yellow. So it can also turn the streams yellow in addition to the orange and red. This yellow boy can kill off life along its drainage journey wherever it lands, like wherever that ends up going. And small aquatic life that feeds off of the bottoms of the ocean. So she was saying how it coats the bottom of the oceans and streams. Well, anything that's feeding off of that is starting to ingest that metal and acid mine drainage.
And think about like our muscles and other bivalves are one of our largest indicators for water quality. They help clean, and they also help determine the quality of the water. And so if we have all these metals in there ingesting them, we're killing them off.
Yeah. And that's going to affect the quality of the water. Like, that's why they're changing color, because they're killing the animals that are cleaning.
It's a vicious cycle.
And so, as we discussed, acid mine drainage also can form ferric hydroxide precipitate, and that lowers the pH, damages most of the existing microorganisms in that area or stream. It can also, so acid mine drainage can also make toxic metals that are present in rocks in the stream dissolve into the stream. So it can actually, like, break this down. Like, remember our acid episode, acid can break down things, and in this case, it's breaking down rocks in these streams that have other heavy metals.
Mm-hmm. Aluminum, iron, cobalt, cadmium. Like, it's not just iron that's affecting lead.
Yeah.
Like, many, many, many things. And, like, that is why pH and keeping the pH of water is so important, because the minute it goes out of whack, all of these things, it's like a trickle effect.
And if you recall from our acid rain episode, pH numbers below 7 indicate acidity. Stream pH for freshwater is 7, but acid mine drainage can lower it to 2.5. 2.5, you guys. The above reactions can only occur at a pH around 3.5. So all those reactions she was talking about, like, it has to be that low for that to happen. So once a stream has changed color, like, it has gone through all of these phases, and the pH is, like, it's incredibly low.
Yeah, it's dangerously low. They cannot support life. Like, we can't stress this enough. It's not just like, oh, it's a yellow boy. It's like, no, like, the stream has been completely stripped of all its life-supporting nutrients and ability to carry life, and the only thing that will bring it back is coordinated treatment efforts by humans.
And most acid mine drainage discharges do not stop flowing, according to Hughes. Some of them could be tens of thousands of gallons per minute. So that's like your water treatment facility worth of water.
Coming out every single minute. That is completely contaminated with
metals and sulfides and like a bunch
acid.
of... Yeah.
It's really fun. It's like a freaking... I was gonna say Grateful Dead concert.
Except the mosh pit is the animals trying to fight to survive.
Oh my gosh.
Those poor animals.
Yeah, every single time we do an episode, all I can think about is the wildlife, because I'm like, oh my goodness. They probably have no idea what is happening when this is going on.
Exactly.
It's literally our fault. Because, like, the mines... People were mining, like, before humans existed. There was no people.
Yeah.
It's just heartbreaking to see, like, what we can do and how much we can change an ecosystem just in the pursuit of, like, progress, you know? Because, like, finding coal was a huge innovation, but it's like now we're at the point where we're phasing it out, so we need to be prioritizing reclamation, and there is efforts going on. Pennsylvania has a lot of bureaus and, like, groups that have been formed to help like target these issues, but it needs to be a more concentrated effort through the federal government leading these cleanup efforts.
Yeah, because as we're going to discuss here in a moment, like, it can impact entire continents. Like,
entire continents, yeah.
Like, it's not just, oh, that's happening in Pennsylvania, it's not going to affect me. Like, it's going to the Chesapeake Bay, you guys. Like,
it's going to Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, like, everywhere. And, like, with that, it's going to heavily affect the economy. So economic impacts can vary from a single stream to a whole watershed. Watersheds, as we've discussed, can span entire states or even multiple states along with their aquifers. This can mean drastic impacts to water availability and potability, aka how safe water is to drink. And then for those of you who do not know, there was a South African War in 1899 to 1902 between the mining industry and the Kruger state. This war led to the Transvaal Republic being defeated and recolonized, followed by British dominion over South Africa in 1910. Under British rule, mining interests were seen as a vital source of tax and other state revenue, leading to racist employment practices to endure and allowed the industry to escape financial responsibility for its role in polluting the environment. As we mentioned last week in our misinformation episode, uranium was mined, gold was mined, emeralds were mined, and it was not the white people doing the mining. And they were literally exposing indigenous South Africans to these horrible pollutants, not saying absolutely anything about it, and then going on with their lives like it was nothing. And to this day, the people that are literally, like, instrumental in funding certain governmental activities have profited, and their fortunes were made through these illegal racist mining practices. Like, that's the reality of it. A lot of people that are currently running governments around the world or have heavy influence got their money through these racist practices. And like, it's not just economics that are being affected or the environment, but it's like literally the very fabric of humanity.
Mm-hmm. And I think that this story will actually be really good to share. So the war was fought because the Witwatersrand goldfields were rich in gold-bearing ore. So this land could not be exploited for its resources without huge overseas capital investments in the late 19th century. Keep in mind, overseas.
Emphasis on overseas. Sorry to interrupt, Kim, but I just want to point out that people always talk about how like the third world is poor, but these countries are literally richer than us. Where do you think all of the first world gets their critical minerals from? Like, our exploitation and the colonization and theft of these things are the reason why they are third world and poor, not because they do not have the resources.
Yeah. So the mining industry at this time made it so that African peasants were alienated from their own land and then taxed to seek paid work on the mines that were on their land. So there's very many concerns here, obviously, about the acid mine drainage that has formed due to the mining activities that took place for over 100 years could have drastic effects on the entirety of South Africa. So to paint a picture, South Africa is scarce when it comes to fresh water. And all of the fresh water that is available is accounted for throughout the population. They don't have any excess water for their citizens. Like, they're using every last drop to their best of their ability.
And they even have like water cutoff times where there's only certain amounts and times you can use the water in some areas. Same with electricity. It's like, it's beyond a crisis at this point.
Yeah, and most of the country is semi-arid and only 14% of the land is available for farming. Only 14%. Cities are facing water stress, and in some extreme cases, they're having to recycle their sewage water to be able to have drinking water.
And keep in mind, they do that in the desert. Like, they do that in El Paso, which makes sense because it's a very arid place naturally. But, like, South Africa had hydrologic resources. At one point, they did.
And so in South Africa, there is a place called Johannesburg where mining activities have been present for over 125 years. They serve 9 million people in this area. However, if acid mine drainage infiltrates into their waterbeds, that fresh water that's already scarce to begin with will become even more scarce. And the treatment for acid mine drainage, we will get into that here in a moment, but it's typically costly. And depending on the components of the drainage, like, you have to do different types of treatment. This results in massive expenses for any area utilizing water in the contaminated water bed. So that goes back to it going to entire watersheds. Like, once it gets into that watershed, like, everybody who is using that water has to use treatment processes to be able to use it.
Thanks for sharing that, Kim, because I think that our listeners really need to understand how global these issues are. Like, yeah, we focus in on the eastern region of the United States today in South Africa, but acid mine drainage is present anywhere there's abandoned mines that have not been properly reclaimed or closed. And so I guess it's just to emphasize that, like, yes, we have all this water, but, like, it's still finite and we have to take care of those resources. And if we continue to pollute them in this way, like, it's not only going to affect us, it's going to affect our health. And humans can actually be impacted by acid mine drainage through drinking contaminated water, eating aquatic creatures with the heavy metals in them, and the actual exposure to these heavy metals. If you remember in our acid rain video, we discussed about the effects that acid rain can have on the skin. Well, if you're swimming in these waters with very high pH, you can experience very similar effects. The burning of the skin, and in some places, if it's acidic enough, it can literally burn through your skin. It's
dangerous.
It is dangerous. And again, like, in Pennsylvania, 5,500 miles of waterways and streams are affected by this. Imagine how many people that is serving and how many people have fished in there, because fishing and outdoor sports are massive in Pennsylvania. I knew a lot of people that did fly fishing or would go kayaking or just interact with the water and the land. And I'm just like, that's the water that you're fishing in, that you're swimming in, that you're kayaking in, that you're potentially treating and drinking when you're camping. And that's the effects you can have. And if you ingest that water, you can have irritation to the lungs, and that doesn't even mention the heavy metal impact. So for lead, there is brain, kidney, and nervous system damage. Lead exposure is so dangerous, especially to children. It can literally ruin their IQs and their ability to think and reason and process. And it's tragic. Cadmium can also lead to high blood pressure, liver damage, and cancer. And mercury leads to the complete deterioration of the nervous system. And all of these can be released through those environmental processes.
Yeah, so now that we have worried everybody, let's talk about ways that we can fix this. So let's talk about some treatment methods. So there are both active treatment and passive treatment, and I'm going to start with active and let you take over passive. So first active treatment method we have is lowering pH by adding soda ash or lime, which is typically used in water filtration, to neutralize the acid within the stream bed and aid in precipitating out the metals. So this can actually help the metals form into solids so that you can remove them like with a filter. pH increases can be caused by the lime or soda and can cause heavy metals to be precipitated. And pH can be further raised to thicken the mixture and create crystal-like particles that can be easily removed from the stream bed. So that's actually really cool. Like, you can make crystals out of this stuff to clean it out.
Yeah, and once it's removed, like, the stream has had their pH raised again to a safer level, and it allows life to grow back. So then you can introduce like aquatic plants back into there. You can introduce some keystone species back into there, and like slowly start to build the environment back. And like this is more costly, especially in a large, like the issue is like there's so many miles of stream to cover, but if we could begin at the source and cut it off, then that gives us the chance to really go and clean up what's remaining. And so now getting into passive treatment. So passive treatments are systems that have been created to allow water to just pass through them. And as the water passes through, it improves the overall quality passively. So to create these systems, you need to have flow rate, which is
V/T.
And that is also called discharge. So it's literally the rate at which the volume of water that moves over a fixed point at any given time. And then you also need to know what the chemical compounds in the acid mine drainage are. And so once you know those things, you can actually create these systems. And so the first kind of system that you can create is a constructed wetland. So artificially constructed wetlands can aid in chemical and biological removal of these heavy metals in the water. And they can be aerobic, and if they're aerobic, they treat mildly acidic or net alkaline water that has an elevated iron concentration. The plain language way to say that is basically it is used to treat more mildly acidic water, so not as high of a pH as in like a pH of like 2 or 3. You would see this like around 4 or 5 or like ranges like that. Or you can have anaerobic, which typically require a longer detention time or a longer time that the water spends going through the wetland, and a larger surface area, so a larger amount of space to lower the alkalinity. And then you can have bioreactors, which contain microbes like sulfate-reducing bacteria. And these can help reduce sulfate and metal concentrations in the water. Sulfate-reducing bacteria from H2S creates this reaction with the dissolved heavy metals in the acid mine drainage to form insoluble metal sulfides. And that allows them to be precipitated out. So essentially, it reacts with metals that have dissolved in the water and forms an insoluble metal sulfide. So something that's not going to be dissolved again. And then it allows it to be precipitated out. So these sulfate-reducing bacteria also form bicarbonate, which is kind of like soda ash or lime. And as we mentioned, it can increase alkalinity. And alkalinity is so important in water treatment systems because it's measures the ability of a water to resist change to acid. So the higher the alkalinity, that's essentially saying the more basic it's going to be. And so that's saying like you can dump more acid in, but with the bicarbonate, it doesn't raise the pH or make it more acidic. And so it helps to neutralize the acid once it gets formed. And our last form is anoxic limestone drains in limestone beds. So these beds contain limestone, which react with the acidic water to neutralize the acid and precipitate the metals. And then it is capped with clay or soil to create an anoxic environment, which is an environment devoid of oxygen, where the acid mine drainage cannot access any oxygen because it needs oxygen for all of those reactions to occur. Oxygen's like the driver, oxygen and water.
Yeah.
And in the streams that are healthy, it has an abundance of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the effluent, or the water that is bad and icky and gross, that has the polluted and stuff in it, is held in a settling pond, and it allows the pH to raise and come back to a healthy level and lets the metals precipitate out, and then that water is typically pumped back into the stream after.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a couple more methods, but those are just the three main ones.
Yeah. And I think that, it's important with acid mine drainage to keep in mind, like, whenever there is abandoned operations of any kind, like, there's going to be ramifications for that land because you just left all that stuff there.
Yeah.
And with these mines, like, since oxygen and water is all you need, if you're deep enough, you have water, you have oxygen, like, that's going to happen inherently.
Exactly. And that's why we're seeing the widespread nature of this, and why we wanted to do this episode, because although right now, like, this isn't necessarily something that affects us in the part of the world we live in, it affects our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important that we get this out here.
Yeah, so I think that's everything that we have for this week's episode.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope that you learned something new about acid mine drainage, and that you can go forth and discuss these issues.
Yeah, and we hope that you tune in next week when we discuss super fun sites. All right, bye.
Bye. We are streaming on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your...
I'm so sorry. I don't know what has come over me.